In this video, we'll begin our discussion on Chapter 1, in which we'll be overviewing the field of economics. But before we do so, let us overview the course, break it down in terms of components, and see how today's lecture fits into the scheme of things. So beginning with that course overview, recall that in this course we seek to become more informed macroeconomic actors by understanding outcomes in an economy, as well as how those outcomes can be influenced, where we will accomplish these tasks by breaking up the course into 3 distinct units on scarcity and macroeconomic indicators, growth and business cycles, as well as policy. Now, in terms of this first unit that we'll be beginning, this unit on scarcity and macroeconomic indicators will serve the purpose of generating economic fundamentals for us, in which we'll examine the scarcity axiom as well as its consequences to then lead the way of developing an explanation for price and quantity determination for a single good or service, from which we'll transition from these more general economic fundamentals to more macro-focused fundamentals by developing 3 macroeconomic indicators that we can use to gauge the performance of an economy with, which will prove to be important in later units when we will explain the outcomes of an economy. Now, in terms of this first chapter for this first unit, our overall tasks will be to generate some economic fundamentals, in which we'll be doing so by overviewing the field of economics and examining some consequences of the scarcity axiom by looking at the production possibilities of an economy. This then brings us up to today's lecture, where in our overview of the field of economics, we will start with the scarcity axiom to then discuss our agents of consumers and firms, how they interact in markets, defining aggregate markets and why they may be useful, then go over intervention, and then conclude with distinguishing between micro versus macroeconomics. With all this in mind, let us then begin. So, every day decisions are made, where these decisions can range from the individual level, in which how an individual is using their time each day, or to a more aggregated level, in which the decision is what goods and services should a country produce. A tool at our disposal in terms of to think about how these decisions are made will be through economics, in which economics is the study of choice and seeks to address how decisions are made under scarcity. And this is the tool that we use in order to understand decision making from our agents, as well as to explain outcomes in an economy with. Now, in terms of this tool that we have at our disposal, the initial truth that we take in economics is that of the scarcity axiom, which states that agents have an unlimited amount of wants, but a finite quantity of resources, where here an agent is going to be a decision maker, a want is going to be something that makes the agent at least as well off, if not strictly better off, and a resource is going to be something used to fulfill a want. Now, an immediate consequence of this axiom is scarcity itself, in which scarcity is going to be the lack of resources to satisfy all wants with those resources. And a consequence of this will be that agents must then choose how to use their resources to fulfill wants, in which the agent types that we'll be primarily interested in this course will be that of consumers and firms. So to proceed, let us examine these agent types individually. Starting off, we have our consumers. Consumers are going to be agents that use their time and income to engage in leisure, engage in labor, as well as consume goods and services, where tying that into the scarcity axiom in terms of our agent, which here is going to be our consumers, and their resources and wants, we'll have that their resources will be time as well as income, while the wants to the consumer will be their leisure time as well as consuming goods and services. Where in terms of this agent, what they'll be doing in terms of their behavior is that they'll use their resource of time to sell a portion of it in the form of labor in order to generate their second resource of income, where the remaining time that the consumer has that was not used for labor then fulfills their want of leisure time, and with the income that they generated from the time they sold with their labor, they can then use to fulfill their second want, which is consuming goods and services, which then leads to a behavior of buying goods and services. With this in mind, proceeding on to our second agent type, we'll have firms, where these agents use their factors of production to produce goods and services in order to generate profits, where here their resources will be the factors of production, while their wants will be profits. And in terms of their behavior, well, firms need factors of production to produce goods and services, so they will purchase these factors of production in order to have that resource, and this will be money leaving the firm, from which, with those factors of production, they can produce goods and services that they will then sell, where this will be money flowing into the firm, where the difference between the money that's generated from selling the goods and services and the cost to purchase these factors of production will then be their want in the form of profits. Now, in terms of the firm's resources of the factors of production, there's going to be four of them to consider. The four are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, in which all four factors are needed in order for a firm to produce goods and services, and the entrepreneur is going to be the one that ties it all together in terms of assembling all of them and allowing for the production of goods and services to take place in the first place. Now, with our consumer and firm agents covered, let us now proceed on to markets, where we saw that these consumers and firms have buying and selling behavior that contrasts from one another, and they also had contrasting resources and wants. Well, it will be the case oftentimes that these consumer and firm agents will often interact in order to exchange goods and services as well as factors of production, where institutions that bring these buyers and sellers together will be referred to as markets. Furthermore, in terms of these markets, we can classify them in terms of what's being exchanged, that is, goods and services or factors of production, in which a market where factors of production are being exchanged, such as labor, this will be known as a factor market, where a market in which goods and services are being exchanged will be referred to as a product market. And in general, through these markets is how price and quantity will be determined. And this will be done through the market mechanism, in which the market mechanism is market participants, that is, our buyers and sellers, responding to price as a signaling device in order to determine quantity levels, where we will see later on, in terms of this signaling device, buyers will respond inversely to price, while sellers will respond positively to price. Now, furthermore, in terms of these markets, each good and service as well as factor of production will have its own product market or factor market, which will be useful to think about price and quantity determination for that individual factor or for that individual specific good or service. However, if we're interested in more aggregate level outcomes, such as that of an economy, which we'll see and define later on as the sum of production and exchange in a given area, it might be more useful to think about the sum of goods and services as well as the sum of factors of production. So by considering the sum of individual products or the sum of an individual factor, we can consider that of an aggregate market, in which aggregate markets will determine the price and quantity level for all products or for all of a specific factor of production for an economy by considering overall buyer and seller behavior. And this will be a useful tool for us as we see in terms of developing our explanations for the outcomes of an economy. With our markets in mind, both at the individual and the aggregate level, we may see that they may not always lead to desirable outcomes. Where we mentioned that the outcome of price and quantity was determined through the market mechanism, in which the market mechanism has price as a signaling device. Should price fail to signal all relevant information, such that it becomes a flawed signal, this could lead to an outcome that is not desirable for our market participants at the individual level, our consumers and firms, or at the aggregate level in terms of an overall economy. When such outcomes occur, this will be referred to as market failure. And when market failure occurs, the government may step in to try to correct the outcome in the individual market or at the aggregate level in terms of the aggregate market. And at the individual level, They may do this by trying to restructure the incentives that consumers and firms are facing, or at the aggregate level, they may step in to try to alter the amount of goods and services an economy is producing. For overall, though, in terms of government intervention, like with market failure, it may be the case that when the government steps in, they too may fail, in which government failure is then said to occur when they fail to improve outcomes in that market at the individual level or at the aggregate level. Lastly, having gone through the scarcity axiom, our two relevant agents, as well as their interactions in markets and how intervention may occur, we now want to conclude by distinguishing between micro and macroeconomics, where microeconomics is going to concern itself with studying individual consumer, firm, or market problems to see how consumers are making decisions and developing explanations to them, similar to that for firms in terms of how they're purchasing factors of production and selling them to generate profits, as well as price and quantity determination under different market structures. Whereas this will contrast with macroeconomics, which is going to be the study of aggregate level markets in order to explain output, price changes, as well as resource utilization for an economy, where, as we mentioned, macroeconomics is going to be our focus, as that is the topic of the course. And with this in mind, what we'll pick up next time is consider further consequences of the scarcity axiom, in which we'll do so by looking at the production possibilities of an economy.